Do you always stare at people like that? I didn't look away. Only when they make it worth it. She laughed, not the laugh I'd seen on magazine covers, not the one she gave to cameras and red carpets and rooms full of people trying to get close to her. This one was smaller, quieter, like it slipped out before she could decide whether to let it. You're not going to ask for a photo? No. Why not? I thought about it for a second. Then I said, because I don't think that's what you need right now. The silence between us lasted longer than it should have for two strangers in the back of a car on a rainy Tuesday night in New York City. She turned toward the window. I watched her reflection in the glass, the way her jaw softened, the way something behind her eyes shifted just slightly, like a door that had been held shut for a very long time and was considering, for the first time, the possibility of opening. I didn't know then what that silence was going to cost me. I didn't know it was going to cost me everything I thought I was. Let me start from the beginning. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. My name is Nora, and 6 months before that night in the car, I was exactly the kind of person nobody notices. Not invisible, just unremarkable in the way that most working people are unremarkable. I had a job I was good at, a 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn that I loved more than I probably should have, 2 best friends who made me feel like the world was manageable, and a life that looked, from the outside, like someone who had made peace with the ordinary. I worked as a private security consultant, threat assessment, protection logistics, close personal detail coordination. I'd spent 4 years in the Air Force before that, and 3 more years learning how to make myself useful in rooms where powerful people needed to feel safe. I was good at reading environments, good at reading people, good at disappearing into the background while keeping my eyes on everything. It was, in retrospect, exactly the wrong skill set for the situation I was about to walk into. Her name was Vivian Cole, and she did not need an introduction. If you lived in America and had any access to media, culture, television, social platforms, or another human being who did, you knew who Vivian Cole was. She had been the face of 3 major fashion campaigns before she was 25. She had hosted award shows, starred in 2 critically acclaimed films, built a beauty brand that had generated 8 figures in its first year, and been named, by 3 separate publications in the same calendar year, the most desirable woman in the country. I knew all of this the way you know things about people you've never met, abstractly, from a distance, the way you know that the sun is 93 million miles away. Factually, without any real feeling attached to it. When my agency told me I'd been assigned as her primary protection detail for an 8-week press tour, I said, "All right," and asked for the logistics brief. I didn't ask what she was like. I didn't ask whether she was difficult or demanding or warm or cold or any of the things that people who work in proximity to famous people want to know before they start. I just asked for the file, the schedule, and the contact list. That was the first and last time I approached Vivian Cole as a job. The first day, she barely looked at me. That wasn't unusual. A lot of clients operated this way. You were furniture. Useful, present, essentially invisible. I had learned not to take it personally. I stood in the corner of her dressing room at the Today Show and watched her team move around her like a choreographed system. The stylist adjusting the hem of her jacket, the makeup artist dusting her cheekbones with something that made her look like she had been carved from light, the publicist reading through talking points in a low, controlled voice. Vivian sat in the center of all of it, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned, very early, how to be looked at without being seen. She had dark hair, cut just below her jaw, and a quality of presence that I couldn't name precisely but felt immediately. The way you feel a shift in air pressure before a storm. She wasn't doing anything remarkable. She was just sitting there, and somehow the room organized itself around her. I stood at the back and watched, and I thought, this is going to be a long 8 weeks. Not because she seemed difficult. Not because she seemed demanding. But because something about the way she held herself, still, careful, self-contained, made me want to know what happened when she stopped. I noticed that. I noted it. And then I filed it somewhere I didn't intend to open again. The second day, she turned around and looked directly at me for the first time. We were in an elevator at the hotel, just the two of us, after her team had spilled out on the floor below. She looked at me in the mirror, not the way people look at their security, assessing, categorizing, just looked, like she was actually curious. "How long have you done this?" she asked. 7 years. She nodded slowly, the way someone does when they're not really processing the answer, but are deciding whether to keep talking. She kept talking. "Do you like it?" It was such an unexpected question that for a half second I didn't answer. Most clients never ask me that. They ask me logistical things. They ask me to move, to wait, to check, to clear. "Yeah," I said. "I do." She turned away from the mirror and looked at me directly then, the way a person looks at another person, not at their function. "Good," she said, almost to herself, like she'd been hoping for that answer and wasn't entirely sure why. The elevator opened. She walked out ahead of me. I stood there for a second before I followed. That was day 2. By day 2, I already knew I had filed something in the wrong place. Here's what nobody tells you about being close to someone famous. You see all the versions of them. Not in a violating way, not through intrusion or privacy breach. You see the versions they move between, the way a performer transitions between costume changes. You see the public face that goes on in the green room. You see the fatigue that comes after. You see the person they become at 10 o'clock at night, when the handlers have gone home and the phone is face down on the coffee table, and they're sitting in a hotel room that looks identical to the last 3 hotel rooms, and the city outside the window could be any city. You see all of it, and you are supposed to see none of it. I was good at that. I was very good at that. Until I wasn't. It took 2 weeks. 2 weeks into the tour. We'd done New York, Chicago, and were sitting in a green room in Los Angeles waiting for a podcast recording, when I noticed something that I shouldn't have noticed. Or rather, something I noticed that I shouldn't have noticed the way I noticed it. Vivian was sitting across the room reading something on her phone. She had a cup of tea in her left hand that had gone cold half an hour ago, and she hadn't touched it since. Her stylist was in the hallway taking a call. Her publicist had stepped out to deal with something. For about 4 minutes, Vivian was alone, or as alone as anyone is when I'm in the room. She sighed. Not dramatically. It wasn't a performance. It was the sigh of someone who thought no one was listening. A quiet, particular exhalation that I can only describe as the sound of a person setting something heavy down for just a moment. And I looked at her, and something in my chest moved. Not a large movement. Not anything I could have pointed to. Just a small internal shift, like a compass needle adjusting. I looked away immediately. I told myself, she's tired. It's a long tour. Everyone gets tired. I told myself this the same way I tell myself other things I don't entirely believe, with conviction, on purpose, because I needed it to be true. The next day, I was more careful. Professionally careful. I kept my attention where it belonged, on exits, on crowd density, on the environmental factors that constituted my actual job. I was precise. I was functional. I was, to all external appearances, exactly what I was supposed to be. Inside was a different situation. Because now I was noticing things I hadn't been noticing before, and I couldn't figure out how to stop. I noticed the way she asked questions. She asked good questions. Specific, attentive questions that told you she'd been actually listening. She asked the sound engineer at a podcast studio what he thought of the acoustics, and then she listened to the answer, and then she asked a follow-up question. I watched the engineer's expression shift from professional courtesy to genuine surprise that she cared. I watched that happen, and I felt something warm and unexplained. I noticed the way she was with her assistant, Maya. Maya was 23 and clearly adored her, and was equally clearly trying not to show it, and Vivian treated her with a particular gentleness, not condescending, not exaggerated, just present, remembering things, saying thank you like she meant it. I noticed the way she read. She always had a book. Real books, paperbacks, covers bent back the way only people who actually read do it. I caught a title once, a biography of a mid-century jazz musician I happened to know, and I had such a specific and irrational desire to talk to her about it that I had to turn away and study the nearest wall with great intensity. I noticed, most dangerously, the way she was when she thought no one was looking. There was a version of Vivian Cole that existed for the world, composed, beautiful, magnetic, always slightly out of reach. And there was a version of her that appeared in unguarded moments, and it was softer than the first one, and more uncertain, and more real, and it undid me a little more each time I saw it. One evening, in the hotel in Dallas, she ordered room service and asked if I wanted anything. Clients didn't do that. I told her I was fine. She ordered anyway. 2 portions of pasta and a basket of bread that arrived with butter in little ceramic cups. She set one plate on the side table near where I was standing and said, completely casually, "You've been on your feet since 6 this morning. Sit down and eat." It wasn't a command. It wasn't flirtation. It was just a human thing. A woman looking at another woman and deciding that she deserved a meal. I sat down. We ate in silence for about 10 minutes. And then she said, without looking up, "How do you do it? Being around people all the time but never really being in it?" I thought about that for a moment. "The same way you do, I think," I said. She looked up then. Her eyes were a very specific shade of brown. Not warm, not cool, something in between that I couldn't resolve into a category. She held my gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then she looked back down at her plate. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Maybe. I should have let that be a professional exchange. 2 people in a particular situation acknowledging something they had in common. Nothing more than that. But I went back to my room that night and sat on the edge of the bed and thought about the way she'd looked at me for just a second, and I thought, something is happening to me. And then I thought, stop it. And then I lay down and stared at the ceiling for a very long time. By week 4, I had developed a system. The system was, don't look at her any longer than necessary. Don't engage beyond the professional requirement. Don't notice the small things. Don't think about the sound of her laugh. The real one. The one that appeared occasionally in unscripted moments and sounded like something she'd been keeping in a room she didn't open often. The system worked inconsistently. It worked well in large crowds. When there were people around, cameras, publicists, fans, strangers who wanted pieces of her, I was very good at being exactly what I was supposed to be. Eyes on the perimeter, hands free, mind clear. It worked less well in the in-between moments. The car rides, the elevator waits. The half hours in hotel lobbies when her next appointment was delayed, and she sat in an armchair with her legs tucked under her, reading, and the whole world went quiet, and it was just her and the book and the particular angle of afternoon light through the window. One afternoon in Boston, she looked up from her reading and caught me watching her. I had not been watching her. I had been watching the lobby. Categorically. Professionally. The fact that my gaze had drifted in her direction was entirely incidental. She looked at me for a moment without speaking. Then, "What are you thinking about?" "Crowd flow," I said. One side of her mouth moved, not quite a smile. Something more complicated. "You're a terrible liar," she said, and looked back at her book. I stood there for a moment, very still. My heart was doing something that I would not have described as a threat indicator, but that was certainly registering as an event. I said nothing. I turned my attention back to the lobby. But from that point forward, something between us had shifted just slightly, the way a key turns in a lock without quite opening the door. We both knew it. Neither of us said so. She started doing something, in the weeks that followed, that I struggled to categorize. She started talking to me. Not small talk. Vivienne Cole did not do small talk. I had learned that early. She talked to me the way people talk when they're thinking out loud. Like I was a sounding board she had decided to trust without entirely announcing that decision. In a car in Seattle, at midnight, after a particularly long event, she said, "Do you ever feel like you built a very beautiful life and then got trapped in it?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about how to answer carefully. "I think," I said slowly, "that sometimes we build things for the version of ourselves we were, and then we change, and the building doesn't." She was quiet for a long time. "That's exactly it," she said. And then she looked out the window at the city passing in the rain, and I watched her reflection again. That face that a million people wanted, and what she was doing with it right then, which was nothing, which was just being alone in the dark with a thought that clearly hurt her. I wanted to say something. I had things to say. I was aware, dimly, in the way you are aware of a fire in a room adjacent to the one you're in. So many things to say that they were stacking up somewhere behind my sternum and becoming a pressure I wasn't sure how to relieve. I said nothing. There was a version of me that I was trying very hard to maintain, and saying what I was thinking would have been the end of her. There was also a thing that happened in Portland that I have not entirely recovered from. We had finished a long day of press appearances. We were back at the hotel. She was in the suite. I was in the hallway doing a final check when she opened the door and said, "Come in for a second." I came in. She was holding a small square piece of paper. She held it out to me without speaking. It was a photograph, black and white, slightly worn at the edges. 2 women on a beach, neither of them Vivienne, a generation or 2 older. Their heads bent together over something the camera couldn't see, laughing. "Found it in a used bookstore today," she said. "Someone left it as a bookmark and just left it there. These 2 women. And I don't know anything about them, but I keep looking at it and thinking about what it would feel like to be that uncomplicated. That just..." She stopped, searched for the word. "That present." I looked at the photograph. Then I looked at her. She was close. We were standing about 2 feet apart, which was closer than I usually allowed, and she smelled faintly of something floral in the cool air from outside, and her eyes when they met mine were open in a way they weren't usually open. "I think they look like they're not worried about anyone watching," I said. She blinked. "Yes," she said softly. "That's it, exactly." We stayed like that for a moment, 2 feet apart, the photograph between us. Something in the air that I was not going to name because naming it would make it real, and real things have consequences. Then I took a breath and said, very professionally, "I'll finish the check. Lock the door behind me." I was in the hallway for 30 seconds before I realized I'd forgotten how to breathe normally. I stood with my back against the wall and I said to myself, silently, with great clarity, "You are in significant trouble." I spent the next 2 days being aggressively, deliberately, exhaustingly professional. She let me. She didn't push. She gave me the space I was manufacturing, and she did it with a grace that made it worse, somehow. Made me feel seen, even in my retreating, which was not what retreating was supposed to feel like. On the 3rd evening, in the car again, she said quietly, "You don't have to do that, you know." "Do what?" She looked at me steadily. "Disappear." I didn't answer. I looked out the window at the interstate and the dark and the lights of other cars going somewhere else, and I held everything I wasn't saying like a stone in both hands. "I'm not disappearing," I said finally. "I'm being careful." "I know," she said. "I just meant that you don't have to be. Not with me." I could feel the weight of what she was offering, the specific, terrifying weight of it. I didn't take it. Not then. But I didn't put the stone down either. I just held it. But before we go further, if you've made it this far, you already know this feeling, that place between knowing and admitting, the weight of a thing you're carrying that you haven't decided to put down yet. Hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it means everything for this channel to keep going. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and turn on the bell. You'll be the first to know when the next story drops. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever been careful with someone when what you actually wanted to do was be reckless? Have you ever chosen the safe version of yourself and regretted it? Write it for me. I read every single one. And where are you watching from? I'll heart your city. Now, back to Nora. The 8th week was supposed to be the last. There were 4 cities left on the tour: Portland, Phoenix, Austin, and a final event in New York, where it had started, which felt like something the universe had arranged deliberately, and I chose not to think about too hard. I had a plan. The plan was, finish the job, file the report, move on to the next assignment, carry whatever this was quietly back to my apartment in Brooklyn, and set it down somewhere safe and private, where it could not damage anything. The plan was reasonable. The plan made complete professional and personal sense. I had implemented similar plans before. The plan lasted until Austin. We were at a rooftop event, the final public appearance of the tour, a brand celebration that Vivian's team had been managing for months. It was a beautiful night. The city spread out below us in long amber lines, and there were a few hundred people on that rooftop, and Vivian moved through them the way she always moved through rooms full of people who wanted her, with the grace of someone performing the appearance of ease. I watched her from my position near the north stairwell, and I was fine. I was professional and attentive, and completely within the parameters of my job. And then someone came up to her. A woman, tall, dark hair, someone from the brand's team, who touched her arm and said something close to her ear that I couldn't hear. And Vivian laughed. The public laugh. The camera-ready one. And then the woman touched her arm again, with an easy familiarity that suggested they knew each other, and I felt something happen in my body that had absolutely no business happening. It wasn't jealousy. I want to be precise about this, because I told myself for 20 minutes that it wasn't jealousy. It was the specific pain of watching someone you care about in a context that reminds you of the actual distance between you. The real distance. The distance that doesn't appear when it's just the two of you in a car at midnight talking about photographs and beautiful trapped lives. But that is fully, structurally present in a room full of people who belong to her world and you don't. I cared about her. I stood by the north stairwell, and I let myself say it, quietly, privately, in the interior of my own chest, for the first time without immediately arguing with it. I cared about Vivian Cole. I had been falling in slow motion for weeks, and I had been so occupied with pretending I wasn't that I hadn't noticed how far I'd already fallen. The party wound down around midnight. Her team peeled off in groups. I walked her back to the car, and we rode to the hotel in a silence that was different from our usual silences. This one had weather in it. Pressure. At the hotel door, she paused. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." She turned to face me. We were standing in the hotel corridor, the light overhead slightly too bright, and she looked at me with an expression I hadn't quite seen before. Careful, but not guarded, like she had weighed something and decided. "The night in Dallas," she said. "When you said you do it the same way I do, being around people but not really in it." She paused. "Did you mean that? Or were you just being professional?" I could hear the real question underneath that question. I could hear what she was actually asking. "I meant it," I said. "And when you started keeping distance, 2 weeks ago." She stopped, let out a small breath. Was that professional, or was that something else? The corridor was very quiet. The whole building felt quiet. I had spent weeks being careful, precise, managed. I had carried the stone, and I had not put it down, and I had told myself this was the right thing, the sensible thing, the responsible thing for a woman in my position with a client in her position. And standing in that corridor, looking at her face, this face that 1,000,000 people wanted, being offered to me as a person, not a surface, I could feel something cracking, not loudly, not dramatically. Just the quiet sound of something that had been held very tightly for a very long time, finally, quietly, letting go. "It was something else," I said. She held my gaze. For a long moment, neither of us moved. "Nora," she said. Just my name. The way she said it was different from every other time she'd said it. Lower, more direct, with a weight to it that I felt in the center of my chest. "I know," I said. "I know what it is. And I know what you are, who you are. And I know what my job is. And I know that this has about 14 reasons it should never have gotten here. And I'm not asking about the reasons," she said. I stopped. She took one step closer. We were close now. Close enough that I could see the specific way the light caught her eyes, the slight tremor in her breathing that told me she was nervous, which was something I had never seen from her and which undid me completely. "I'm asking about you," she said. "Just you." And I wanted to say, "You already know." And I wanted to say, "I've been standing across every room for 6 weeks trying to figure out how to stop thinking about you, and I'm bad at it. And every time you said my name, I filed it away like something precious that didn't belong to me. And I'm tired. I'm so tired of being careful." I didn't say any of that. I said, "I'm right here." And something shifted on her face. Something wide and specific and real. And she closed her eyes for just a second, like someone who has been waiting for something and is taking a moment to feel that the wait is over. We stood like that, close, not touching, the small gap between us filled with everything we hadn't said. Her hand moved and touched mine. The lightest possible contact, fingers resting against fingers, not a hold, just a presence. And I thought, I have been in this job for 7 years, and I have been careful for 7 years, and I have never, not once, felt this specific kind of afraid, and also this specific kind of certain, at the same time, in the same body. Neither of us spoke. And then her phone rang. It was her publicist. A story had broken. Something about the brand. A supply chain controversy. Nothing to do with her personally, but everything to do with her name being attached to it, which in her world was the same thing. It required her immediate attention. It required calls. It required the machinery to start moving. She looked at her phone. Then she looked at me. In that look was everything that the corridor had been building toward, and also the full weight of the life she lived, and the gap between that life and the corridor, and both of us knowing it. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be." "Nora, it's okay," I said. "Go." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, and she stepped back. And I watched the version of her that belonged to the world reassemble itself around her like a second skin. Not cold, not false, just necessary. Armor. The kind everyone wears when they can't afford to be unguarded. She went inside. I stood in the corridor for about 3 minutes. The last day of the tour, in New York, we were professional with each other in the particular way of two people who have chosen, mutually and without discussion, to hold something carefully so it doesn't break. At the final event, She crossed a room and found me and stood beside me for a moment. Not for a reason. Not with anything to say. Just for a moment. And said quietly, "Thank you. For all of it." "It was a good assignment," I said. She gave me a look that said, "That is not what I meant, and you know it, and I'm going to let you have that." "Yeah," she said. "It was." And then she was called away, and I watched her go. The dark hair, the careful posture, the presence that reorganized every room she entered. And I felt something settle in me that I can only describe as grief with the volume turned low. Not the sharp kind, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but just begins to accompany you. The assignment ended at 6:30 on a Friday evening. I submitted my report. I returned my access credentials. I walked out of the hotel and into the November cold and stood on the sidewalk in Midtown Manhattan with my hands in my pockets. I thought about the photograph. The two women on the beach, their heads bent together, laughing, unconcerned. I thought about the way she'd looked in the corridor in Austin when she said "just you," and the way the light had caught her eyes when something cracked open in her face. I thought about the stone I'd been carrying. I looked at it, finally, clearly. I let myself see what it was. Then I did something I hadn't expected to do. I didn't put it down. I didn't throw it away. I carried it home. Because it was mine. Because it was real. Because something real had happened between us in 6 weeks of cars and corridors and hotel lobbies and rain-covered windows. And the fact that it had ended didn't make it something that hadn't happened. The fact that the world between us was too wide to cross right now didn't mean the thing on the other side of it wasn't true. She had changed something in me. Not broken it. Not destroyed it. Changed it. The way things that matter change things. Permanently. And in the direction of something more real than what was there before. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my Brooklyn apartment on a Sunday morning with a coffee and a book, and my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I answered. "Hi," she said. My chest did the thing it had been doing for 8 weeks. I had thought maybe, without proximity, it would stop. It had not stopped. "Hi," I said. A pause, a careful one. "I was wondering," Vivian said, "if you wanted to get coffee. I'm not calling because of the job. The job is done. I'm calling because..." She stopped. I heard her exhale. "I know it's been weeks. I know the timing before was... I know the situation. But I keep thinking about what you said in that corridor. About being right there." I was quiet for a moment. Outside my window, Brooklyn was doing its Sunday morning thing. Church bells, a dog, the particular unhurried quality of a city deciding to take its time. "I'm still here," I said. A pause, and then, quietly, "I'm glad." We didn't figure everything out on that phone call. There was still the gap. Still her world and my world, and the very real structural differences between them. Still the complexity of what it meant to start something with someone whose life was public in every direction, while mine had always been private. We didn't solve any of that. But we decided together, without using those words exactly, to begin. Not to leap. Not to arrive. Just to begin. Carefully, honestly, with both of us fully aware of what it would ask of us. And that was enough. That was, for the first time in a long time, more than enough. I once thought being careful meant never letting anything get close enough to change you. Vivienne taught me that the most honest thing I'd ever done was admit I was already changed, and then pick up the phone anyway. Love doesn't always look like certainty. Sometimes it looks like two women on a Sunday morning deciding to try, even knowing all the reasons they shouldn't, because the weight of not trying had finally become heavier than the weight of the risk. If this story landed anywhere in your chest tonight, write "sodded" in the comments. That's how I'll know you made it to the end with me. And if you want to stay in this world of stories that feel like something real, click the video on your screen right now. until the next one. Take care of yourself. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description.